Hello, and thanks for joining us on The World Now. Let's begin in Turkey, where Turkey and Syria were barely 3 days after deadly earthquakes devastated both countries. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says the death toll in the country has reached 8,574, even as rescue workers are still searching for victims buried under mountains of rubble. President Erdogan spoke during a visit to some of the areas worst hit by the temblors. At least 2,530 people have died in Syria, according to a tally of numbers made public by the government in Damascus and rescue groups in rebel-held regions, taking the total death toll from the earthquakes to over 11,000. And now nearly 250 schools in Syria's government-controlled areas have been damaged due to the earthquakes. That's according to Syria's education minister, Darem Tabar. The schools were in Aleppo, Latakia, Tartus, Hama, and Idlib, as about 126 schools have been turned into shelters. Amidst the devastations, all hope is not lost, as heart-rending videos of children being rescued from rubble of fallen buildings in Turkey and Syria surfaced earlier today. And this comes side by side with visuals of the dead being pulled out, laying bare the human cost of the earthquake that has ravaged both Turkey and Syria. The United Nations says it is exploring all avenues to get supplies to rebel-held northwestern Syria and has released $25 million from its emergency fund to help kickstart the humanitarian response in both countries. Since the 7.8 magnitude quake struck in the early hours of Monday, an impromptu army of rescuers have worked in freezing temperatures to find those still trapped under the ruins. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said the global body is preparing a convoy to cross conflict lines within Syria, as Monday's earthquakes have damaged the road leading to the main border crossing from Turkey into northern Syria. In Turkey, Dujarric said Syrian refugees made up more than 1.7 million of the 15 million inhabiting the 10 provinces affected by the earthquake.
In response to the multiple earthquakes that rocked southern Turkey and northern Syria yesterday, we announced a $25 million grant to help kickstart the humanitarian response. The funds from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund will help provide urgent life-saving assistance to the region. Martin Griffiths, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, says he wants to ensure the people that they are not alone and that the humanitarian community will support them every step of the way out of this crisis.
We are staying on developments in Turkey and northern Syria, where the death toll from the deadly earthquakes that devastated both countries have now risen to over 11,000. And the impact seems to be different on both countries. And joining me via Zoom from London to discuss the devastating effects of the earthquake is a Middle East political analyst, Robert Inkelesh. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
So I know that you've done a vast reporting and analysis on the Middle East, especially that part of the region as well. Talk to us about what some of the reports you're getting from Turkey and northern Syria.
Well, primarily the reports that I'm getting from people on the ground there, of course, there's massive devastation in Turkey. And of course, most of the impact has been actually on Turkey. The largest death toll is in Turkey. However, in northern Syria is where we're seeing perhaps the people being hit the worst by this, due to the fact that inside Syria, you obviously have the Idlib pocket there, which is not controlled by the government, but is blocked off currently to aid due to a number of different trade routes being blocked. And of course, as well, the Syrian government is under Western sanctions. And because of these sanctions, already the health sector was overburdened. Syrians only had a few hours of electricity per day going into this. They're facing sub-zero temperatures. And just getting in basic goods and supplies to the Syrian people is a huge struggle. Syria has openly requested of the European Union that it send aid to Syria. However, the European Union has so far refused to do so. We've also had a number of players using this tragedy, unfortunately, sort of as a political tool, such as Israel, which used this as an excuse to try and say that the Syrian government contacted it for aid, knowing full well that it wouldn't send the aid. So for the Syrian people who don't have any access to real aid to help them, who have already been through a war, a devastating war since 2011, whether they be in the Idlib pocket or Syrian government-controlled areas, are suffering perhaps the worst in sub-zero temperatures at nights, are having to gather in mosques and churches, and are waiting for crews to come and take possibly their alive or dead loved ones out of the rubble. And this has caused a huge effect, of course, on the ground in Turkey as well. There's a similar situation, but Turkey is actually receiving a large amount of help from the international community.
Absolutely. And perhaps that's the different response to both countries who are both devastated by the same earthquake. But we understand that Syria isn't getting, like you just mentioned, the international aid at all. And there have been calls for more crossing points from Turkey into northern Syria to be open. Can the international community expect safe passage at this time?
Well, it has to mobilize, and the number one thing that has to be focused on now really is the U.S. sanctions. If not them being lifted, there being an amendment so that goods can get into Syria, because the Syrian people who have been through a devastating war since 2011 still haven't seen their cities rebuilt. Millions of Syrians are living in refugee camps. They are, suffering from malnutrition. There's an ongoing cholera epidemic which has broke out inside of Syria. The Syrian people don't have, in any area of Syria, access to their resources, which are under de facto U.S. occupation in the northeast of Syria, in the Deir ez-Zor area, the Al-Ammar oil fields, as well as their most fertile agricultural areas. So the electrical grid in Syria, for instance, doesn't function properly. There's a few hours a day of electricity. Reconstruction efforts from the war even have been extremely tough, and they haven't been able to rebuild properly, let alone from this natural disaster, which has claimed millions of lives. And from Syrians I've spoken to on the ground, they've said that this was even scarier than being under bombardment, because they didn't know at any moment every single building could collapse, and they had to spend untold amounts of time on the streets fearing for the lives of their family members, and still many of them not being able to go back to their homes. So at this moment, there has to be a mobilization in the international community. Politics have to be put to the side, and the Syrian people need to be helped. And so if that means amending the sanctions, then it means amending them.
You just painted a picture of a crisis within a crisis for Syrians in that region. And from what you said, do you think it's time to lift sanctions and normalize ties with the regime?
The normalization effort can come at a different point. This is something of a political point. Normalizing ties with the Syrian government for outside powers. There's an ongoing pursuit of such a normalization deal between Turkey and the Syrian government at this time, but enabling goods to come in and relief aid and workers to come in, and treating Turkey the same as Syria, because they are both impacted by this natural disaster of tremendous proportions, is the utmost importance at this time. Normalization efforts, political efforts can be at another time, but it is times like this which really tests the morality of the likes of the United States government and the European Union, which refuse to send help and aid, or even partially amend their sanctions to enable goods to go into Syria to help millions of Syrians who are suffering from this, and thousands upon thousands of Syrians who have died are being still dug out of the rubble, tens of thousands who have lost their homes, and who are suffering at this point.
We'll continue to monitor developments and how the international community responds to this devastating earthquake. Thank you so much for talking to us Middle East political analyst Robert Inkalesh.